We're going to continue on this critical minerals kind of track here in the next 30 minutes of conversation. And Mike and I were kind of chatting before we started coming up, and we were talking about, listen, like critical minerals, this isn't the first time in history we've talked about critical minerals. In previous cycles, in the early 2000s leading up to World War I, World War II, obviously critical minerals were absolutely important for wartime infrastructure. I'm not saying we're heading into a wartime situation, but I think the word critical for critical minerals, what also is important is using the word critical when we're in regards of timing. Because if this thing does turn, we've talked a lot about reshoring, nearshoring, this deglobalization. If something were to happen, the timing of getting these minerals into the supply chain would absolutely be critical. So maybe we just have this general conversation right off the bat is, are we in a situation to where we can act fast if we need to? I'll start with you, Paul, because you're the one most down the line.
Sure. Well, and I mean, the short answer is absolutely no, right? So, I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges in the industry that you've got good projects like we all have up here, and to get these projects up and running is an incredibly large task, and part of it is you have to build the mine, which is a big task. You got to raise the money to build the mine, which is a large task. But the big one that I really think that we need to work on as in Canada is the regulatory burden. And the challenge with the regulatory burden is it's time and money. And you look at a project like Casino. I mean, we've been, depending on when you want to say what the start line is, I mean, we've been working on the regulatory process here now for a couple of years, and we still got a number of years in front of us. And we're talking, tens of millions of dollars to get through all the work that needs to be done. It is a huge lift. When you've got a large project like ours, that's okay. Because it's a project that can sort of handle that sort of price tag to get through the regulatory process, but the regulatory process does not scale. And when you've got smaller projects that have that same regulatory process to get through, it's a real challenge.
Mike, what are your thoughts? You and I were having the conversation, and you've probably said some.
Well, those are excellent thoughts for Paul, and I agree completely on the need to streamline regulatory in all of North America. Yeah, for me, that question came up because recent meetings with senior members of government, they're admitting that they're quite frustrated by mining supply chains. It's not as simple as building a factory or something else where you can simply fund something and have it built in a year or two. The whole process of exploration that you see with all these companies here at the show, from earlier stage projects through to more advanced one like Paul's, it's an iterative process and a messy process, and governments are realizing that they can't just turn this on. So to your question, they're accepting that they can't do it quickly, and they're very concerned about onshoring that supply. Borders are rising. We are deglobalizing. For a bunch of reasons, geopolitics is front and center. Where are we going to get these supplies from quickly, and where? And that's a really good question. In Montana, we're blessed to be in a producing district. In the Yukon, we're in a district that is an excellent place to work, great rocks. We're very well aligned with Kalani Nation, Champagne-Atiak Nation, grateful for that earlier stage. But that regulatory piece that you mentioned, and actually getting past the NIMBY thing and actually building mines quickly is the missing piece there.
Graham, you're coming off a nice discovery, by the way. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody should go watch it. Go take a look. In this new iteration of an Explorer that you're in with Cascadia here, you are starting to focus more on base metals, critical minerals. How has that kind of direction changed for you in the last couple of years, moving somewhat away from precious metals and really starting to focus on copper, on base and critical minerals? And how has your kind of directive maybe changed since then?
Thanks. Thank you for the mention of the discovery. We did make a really nice discovery a couple months ago. We announced that new copper gold porphyry with Cascadia. We had been trending to moving towards copper and gold for the last couple of years. We kind of saw the writing on the wall that this was going to be where you can actually get the interest. We were a gold only for quite a while. We transitioned. We started picking up copper gold projects around BC and the Yukon, and also closer to infrastructure. So, kind of going back to the idea of how can we get these critical metals and minerals out. It was important for us to have some infrastructure nearby. And again, just to go back to your last question, it's important to realize that, like for us, for example, we made a new discovery, but that's just a start. You need to start doing baseline environmental. You're really starting from scratch. These will take years and years. You can accelerate the exploration, but you need to really start doing all of that baseline work, and that takes time. And on top of that, more things are being put on proponents at different levels that are different than 20, 25 years ago. So these kind of things are happening, and I mean, a shout out to, we were just up at the Prince George at BC Natural Forum, and the BC government just redid their environmental impact system. So they actually have timelines now. And I think the Yukon is working towards that, which is great. We want to support that. I think Yukon will get there, and we'll all benefit from that. So. Really, I mean, things are just going to take a little bit longer to get out to market, that's for sure, or get to a point where you can make a construction decision.
In the last panel, we were fortunate to have Premier Pillay up here. We were talking about critical minerals. This is we're titled Yukon's thought leaders on critical minerals. So let's provide some. So let's lead some thought here. With
no pressure on that.
Without the premier on stage, but as developers, explorers in the Yukon, and me, who is an investor following very closely, and I mentioned this in the last hour. Obviously, it's important to have these critical minerals agendas being published. Whether it's the territories or the provinces in Canada. Obviously, the United States has a big one, but you've got to. It's got to be actionable. You've got to see follow through. It's got to be more than just ink on paper. And how do we get from point A to point B, which all four of us know takes many, many steps, not just two? How do we start initiating those tangible deliverables in a meaningful way that actually not only attracts the importance from government, but actually attracts more capital into it? And maybe we start with you, Paul, because you're furthest down the line here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I mean, first of all, I mean, it's what's interesting, and I'll come to your point about tangible deliverables, because I think that's a very important thing. But I think just to take a step back, what we do have right now, which is quite exciting, is that we have everyone pulling in the same direction. So, I mean, obviously, mining companies are wanting to develop their mines. Obviously, that's what we want to do. But we've got government, and you would have heard it from Premier Pillay this morning. Doing lots of work. I mean, if you look at our project, there's infrastructure in terms of road. There's initiatives around power. There's commitments around port. I mean, this is going to benefit the entire mining industry. So the government is pulling in that direction as well. The First Nations. I mean, one of the we forget this in the Yukon is that. Yukon, because of devolution, because of the, umbrella final agreement with the First Nations, the relationship in the Yukon between the territorial government, mining companies, and First Nations, I think, is the best in Canada. And, if you look at that has been working very, very well as well. So everyone is pulling in the right direction. Like you said, the key is, okay, this is all nice. Everyone can say nice words and hand waving. Show us the actual deliverables on this. And I think that you are starting to see those deliverables. I mean, from the Yukon government, you saw a commitment of $21 million for the Port of Skagway. That was passed. That is legislation that is now passed in the last budget that happened at the end of last year. You're seeing, in terms of, and this is going back a few years, you're seeing a commitment from the federal government in terms of road infrastructure, the Gateway Project, the number of roads moving forward. I mean, you're seeing money out of the federal government, the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund. I mean, this is a specific fund that is there for governments and companies to tap to develop more infrastructure. So, I mean, those are actual tangible things, in addition to all the, like I said, everyone, at least in the Yukon, is pulling in the right direction, and the feds as well. I mean, you had Chrystia Freeland standing up saying we need to streamline critical minerals projects, and you've got, the leader of the opposition, pushing, again, even the opposition and the government in power at the federal level are like, yeah, we need to figure out what we need to do. That's a little more words. We need to see some more action there, but I think everyone, it's the first time in, the decade plus that I've been involved in this project that everyone is pulling in the same direction, which is nice.
Mike, you're the only one up here who has the privilege of working both in Canada, in Yukon, and the United States. Who's doing it better?
Well, the U.S. certainly raised the bar with an enormous amount of money to subsidize mining, and that's been a very interesting move there. Really, overall, it's kind of similar to operate beyond that. Canada, of course, has followed with the grants that you mentioned. There's an education piece there at a high level that is needed, and also the engagement with the public. People need to know where their metals come from and start to choose where they come from, even. And then the question of balance of metal supply globally, why we need mines. This piece is missing sometimes. We get out and we talk to people, and it's striking to me how many people think that mines could just go away tomorrow and there wouldn't be an effect to that. We haven't educated effectively in that regard. Specific to the Yukon, I'm, having been in Whitehorse with you gents just in November, really encouraged by the ability to be thought leaders there and set a new precedent. Mining is a lead industry in a small place where you can phone the premier directly, and the communities are engaged. Kluane, Champagne-Ajac for us, of course, others. That's really encouraging, and I think we're in a position to set some new precedents and do much better. But it is ultimately that education and engagement piece, I think.
Graham, I may have misspoke. You have projects in the U.S. too. Is that right?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Okay. So I didn't misspoke. With this new iteration in your career, Graham, I mean, how have things changed because of this critical minerals agenda? I mean, not just in Yukon, but in all of Canada. But how has it changed for you as an explorer, as far as what you're seeing, what you're going after? Because there's been big highs and there's been lows in your career, but this one seems you're onto a new discovery. The critical minerals is obviously that agenda is backing that discovery, and so how has things changed for you in the last 3 years since this started pushing forward?
I think just kind of going back to the last question a little bit as well, is that there's a bigger push nationally and provincially and in the territories of an acceptance of copper and the realizing that we're going to need these minerals to change the world. And it's been a little bit easier to raise some money. The federal push to get critical flow-through charity dollars has been a big push to help raise money. That's been very helpful for us, exploring for critical metals and minerals. That's kind of one of the big ones. I kind of also want to go back to that because, we are meeting with a lot of First Nations, and just coming from BC as well is going back to that piece where people are buying into it, and that's happening in BC as well. And I think that's kind of also going back to the first question, is how are we going to move these things forward? I think the First Nations is probably one of the biggest things that we can do, and that's building genuine partnerships and meaningful partnerships with First Nations, because the First Nations will help. If you have that good relationship, they will help you move those projects forward. And if there's a nice, good, open partnership, you can get these projects moved forward. And you're seeing that in BC. You're seeing it in the Yukon. And that's been one of the biggest changes I've seen. I mean, it was a very optimistic conference in BC in that light, with some of the mineral projects in there and some of the great partnerships that are being done with these exploration companies at every stage. And those are so critical to move these projects, where you can't actually move them forward if you don't have those partnerships. So I was very impressed with what we were seeing, and that kind of change of tone in the last couple of years.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to corroborate that and note that First Nations were actually approaching us. We've obviously had a good engagement going back 6 years with both Klawani and Champagnat. But in the past 2 years, the critical minerals things has really registered for them. And they're approaching us about working with us to inventory critical minerals on our ground together. And that's exactly what you're speaking to. And that's what we need to see. And that's really encouraging.
Graham, I wanted to ask you, this is more just an exploration question. You had this very nice discovery. We have seen a couple important discoveries over the last few months of copper, precious metal, porphyry drill results. And the market's been rewarding those, which is a lot different than what we've seen in the last couple of years. But how do you, with this type of mineralization that you are attracted to and trying to continue to build in advance, how do you stay competitive knowing there's a number of peers out there who are also drilling good grade, good widths, and trying to attract some of the same pots of money that you're trying to attract?
I love that question, and I think there's a company down in the States that just made a nice discovery, and they're getting a lot of traction as well, a copper gold focused company. And what I like about that is they've kind of called it the Stikine of the South, and that's what we have up in the Yukon, which is the Stikine of the Yukon. And for everyone, basically the Golden Triangle in BC is so well regarded for these copper gold porphyries. Well, the same kind of rocks go up into the Yukon, and no one has ever really looked up in the Yukon meaningfully. I mean, you look at the claims up there right now, and there's hardly any claims, and that's where we made our discovery, which is in Yukon Stikine terrain. Same with the one to the south in the States, it's getting a lot of traction. So there's still a lot of opportunities out there, and we're kind of one of the first movers up there in the Yukon Stikine, and we're going to be doing a regional program. We already did a program already this year, and we're going to be looking to expand that and explore throughout the entire Yukon terrain. So, in that particular example, it's actually beneficial that we're making these in the same kind of terrain, but I think it's good because when you do make those discoveries, people realize that there can be a lot of money to be made in this industry and at these certain stages in mineral exploration. So, we want these kind of successes because that will bode well for all of us.
One of the successes everybody wants is casino, Paul.
Me too.
Talk about making a lot of money. Let's get this. Let's get this done. But let's talk about with critical minerals. How important is it to have those partnerships with the major miners to move these projects forward?
Yeah, I think it's very, very key, and we're obviously we have had Rio Tinto as a strategic investor now for a little over 2.5 years, and Mitsubishi for a little under a year, and it's been really good and eye-opening working with them. Both of those groups, have come in, and their investments have been centered around, look, we love the project, we've done our diligence, but we want to do a few more things. So we, the initial stage of working with Rio Tinto, did a bunch of work with them, met work. We actually just we signed a new agreement with them in November. The new agreement, part of the new agreement is actually going through all the work that they'd done. They had 400 people over that 2.5 years in various disciplines looking at the project. So they've now data dumped that to us, and so we're looking at, are there some small things that we can do in terms of the project to make it even better based upon what they've brought. And then with Mitsubishi, in terms of their investment, we did some drilling last year. We're actually kicking off a MET program here pretty soon, within sort of weeks here to really dive down and look at concentrate quality across the project. So, they having Rio Mitsubishi, they bring a number of things. I mean, obviously, first of all, those investments brought money, and you're seeing. I'm not surprised at all, but it's interesting to see that. In this challenging market to raise equity, you're seeing the strategic. I mean, the majors are realizing if we don't invest, there's going to be nothing in the pipeline. So they're starting to invest. So that's exciting to see. So obviously they bring that. They bring some technical know-how, and they also, I think, provide a path to sort of say, okay, well, how are you going to build this multi-billion-dollar project, Paul? It's like, well, we've got some now fairly deep-pocketed, partners in terms of moving the project forward. And so, you can start to see a path to this becoming a mine. I think that's important for investors. It's important, and not just investors, shareholders of Western Copper and Gold. It's important for the Yukon government to make commitments on power and port. It's important for the federal government to make, those investments and those things as well. So, back to my earlier comment, everyone's pulling nicely in the same direction right now. And part of that key is having those major strategic investors.
I know you don't speak on behalf of your partners or any other major miner by any means, but it really feels like despite this critical minerals push and momentum and agenda driving by federal governments, that's not necessarily the incentive of the mining companies to look at bigger projects and consider those massive investments. Their incentive really is just the economics and longevity of their companies. And so do we really, I guess the honest question, do we need a critical minerals agenda for these companies to continue to consider taking on projects like Casino?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a circular sort of discussion though, right? Because you have government saying, okay, what can we do to help facilitate critical mineral development? They're doing that because they're seeing electrification. They're seeing all these, onshoring, all those things that you talked about earlier. That causes the price to go up. The price goes up, causes major mining companies to say, I think both Rio and Mitsubishi have publicly made, commitments and sort of saying, look, copper for us, copper is a key part of our future. Why is it a key part of their future? Because of electrification, because of onshoring, all those sort of things that they're looking to do. That's driving the price. That's driving that investment. That's why I'm getting those investments in Western Copper and Gold, is because those are focuses of those large companies.
Mike, Graham, do you have any follow-up comments? We got a couple of minutes left. Any comments regarding majors looking big?
Yeah. Well, we of course brought Glencore in as a strategic, and our sister company brought in Newcrest. Lots of checks being written like that lately. And what's striking to me is we've seen Sumitomo now, Samsung, VRIC into Hercules. All these big investments by majors, often at a substantial premium to market. Meanwhile, the retail space is just bombed out, smashed down. All these ugly words you can give on our excellent projects and many companies out there. This always presages a run in the juniors, right? The retail investors have gone away, and I kind of understand why. I look at my own portfolio. I'm upset about it. But the point is the majors are writing checks, and more of them, and on junior-friendly terms. So that's really good to see. And your question about critical minerals was a really good one. Glencore, we have 9 commodities that are listed as critical in the U.S. Glencore's been clear they're really looking at nickel. They also like our copper and our cobalt. They like the PGMs and the co-products, but it really is about nickel in the Yukon and in Montana. So I think they are thinking 10, 20 years out like a big miner should. And they are thinking through commodity cycles somewhat. They're just looking at supply, demand, and basics. Yeah.
Graham, do you have any follow-up at all?
Yeah, I think having the majors or large corporates involved has a number of benefits. We have Hecla at 19.9 and VRIC just under 10, and high net worth investors as well. So almost, we only have 37 million shares outstanding, and just under 50% of that is owned by majors and high net worth, dedicated people that are in the industry. And that's so critical, because when other investors get in, they're partnering up with these majors who have a longer term approach. And when you do make that hit, or you're having extra success, that just makes the stock incredibly torquey. So you can actually do quite well by having those people involved. I've had a number of majors, Agnico, VRIC, numerous companies over the years. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed is just kind of a side note, is they develop our team. Like, we have a great team, but you get access to so much of their proprietary ways of looking at things, and we just soak it up. That's either be an investment because you're going to have access to their team. They're going to be involved. You're going to have technical committees with them, and you just absorb all of that. And it's good for our shareholders because we're becoming better and better and better at what we do.
Well, I appreciate your time. It's good to see all three of you. And I think we were definitely leaders of thought in critical minerals in this presentation. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.